My name is Cameron Spear, and I'm an economist with the National Marine Fisheries Service in Santa Cruz, California. Today I'm going to talk briefly about some of the ecological and policy issues around fish habitat and in-stream flow. This is an example of why an understanding of in-stream flow issues is so important. So today I'm going to talk about three types of fish that are similar to each other, but are different species: Chinook salmon, coho salmon, and steelhead trout. All of these are very important economic and cultural resources on the west coast of the United States. People fish for them, both recreationally and commercially. They're very important to Native American tribes in the area, and in some ways they really define parts of this region. In certain areas of California and the Pacific coast, some of these fish are at risk of extinction. There are a variety of reasons for this, but we do know that salmon and steelhead need sufficient amounts of high-quality water in rivers and streams in order to survive. Now, salmon are an ocean-going fish, and though they spend most of their lives in the ocean, they also spend some of their critical life stages in fresh water, and that's where in-stream flow becomes so important. This slide is just to give you an idea of the area we're talking about and how biologists tend to look at fish populations. This is a map of California and a portion of southern Oregon that shows where some of these fish live. Now, biologists essentially break the coast down into related watersheds and look at how fish populations are doing within those areas when deciding whether certain fish need special protections. The slide also lists all of the fish that in this area of the Pacific coast are listed for protection under the Federal Endangered Species Act. There's some supplementary materials on the ESA more generally if you'd like to learn more about this very important environmental law. So let's talk a little bit more about the salmon and steelhead life cycle. All of these fish follow the same basic pattern. That is to say, they're anadromous fish. Now, anadromous means that these fish are born in freshwater. They spend most of their lives in the ocean, and then return to freshwater rivers and streams to spawn. Spawning is when fish lay eggs. These salmonids that we're talking about, the Chinook salmon, coho salmon, and steelhead trout, are probably the most well-known examples of anadromous fish, but there are other examples in other parts of North America, like striped bass and shad. In the case of these salmon and steelhead, adults spawn in the freshwater rivers and streams in which they were born. After the eggs hatch, juveniles stay in freshwater for some time. It could be a few months to more than a year, depending on the species and the subspecies. During this time, these fish eat stuff, they hide from predators, and grow big enough to move out to the ocean. When the young fish are mature enough to migrate downstream to the ocean, they're called smolts. When they reach the ocean, they spend a few years growing and maturing, and the cycle repeats itself. As we can see, these fish need good freshwater habitat in order to reproduce and mature effectively. And that's why salmon ecologists and policymakers are interested in in-stream flow issues, because salmon need water in rivers and streams that is of sufficient quality and quantity. But in-stream flow isn't the only factor affecting salmon and steelhead health. These fish are subject to multiple stressors in addition to in-stream flow issues. Dams, like the one in this photo, prevent fish from moving upstream in a watershed, and so prevent fish from using all the habitat that might be available to them. That's one reason why there are efforts underway to remove dams on the Elwha, Klamath, and other rivers on the Pacific coast. Another issue is that many activities that occur on land, like urban and suburban areas, logging and mining, generate water pollution. And also, over the last 150 years or so, people have modified natural flow regimes in many rivers. Actions and structures that were built to control floods, generate hydropower, use water for agriculture in cities, and drain wetlands have changed the way rivers flow. These changes have resulted in less habitat diversity and higher water temperatures. So when scientists and policymakers think about how to help salmon recover, they think about a lot of things, and not just stream flow. But since in this course we're interested in in-stream flow, let's talk more about how important this is to salmon and steelhead on the west coast, including a couple of examples. Fish need water, and generally more water is better because it creates more habitat for fish to use. So more water means a wider and deeper river with more places for fish to be. In addition, periodic floods that occur in the fall and spring create great habitat that contains a lot of insects and other things for young salmonids to eat. Having enough flow in rivers creates habitat diversity, so things like gravel bars are created as sediment is washed down the river. Also, there has to be enough flow in the river when large fish are moving upstream to spawn. In some cases, in very dry years, you will see large fish get stranded before they can reach the best spawning habitat. Also very important is having enough water in the stream keeps the water at a good temperature. Salmon and trout like cold water. When there's not enough flow in the summer, the water moves slowly or sits in pools where it gets hot in the sun, and that's not good for fish. So let's quickly mention two examples of rivers in California where in-stream flow has been an issue for salmon and what some of the possible solutions are. These two rivers are the Russian River and the Shasta River. The Russian River is in northern California, just north of San Francisco. The watershed is wine country. Some of the most expensive wine you will ever see is made here, and the grapes use a lot of water for irrigation and for frost protection. The Russian River is also home to the Central California coast coho salmon. In fact, this watershed is the largest one in this fish's range and contains 17% of its historical habitat. So it's a pretty important place for coho salmon. Rainfall, and therefore stream flow, is very seasonal. Like most areas of the western U.S., it rains quite a bit in the winter and spring, and nearly not at all in the summer. Now, in the summer, the grapes need to be irrigated, which requires a small but steady volume of water. A bigger issue is that in the spring, it can get cold enough to freeze and damage parts of the grapevine. So vineyards will use groundwater or even river water to protect their grapes. What they do is spray the vines with water, which then freezes and coats the sensitive parts of the plant with ice. Now, believe it or not, this actually protects the plant from the cold. Springtime frost protection requires a lot of water, a few times per year. Vineyards use groundwater or sometimes surface water diversions, and because the aquifer is connected to many of the small streams in the watershed, stream flow can become very depleted, while lots of vineyards do this at the same time. This is not good for fish in this watershed because the best habitat is generally upstream in small tributaries that don't have much water to begin with. Fish then aren't able to use this habitat. In some cases, some stream reaches can become dewatered, which strains juvenile fish. So what are vineyards and policymakers doing in this area? For one thing, they're attempting to improve water management. This includes promoting conservation and increased water use efficiency among both agricultural and municipal users. They're also exploring groundwater banking. Some projects are increasing the capacity for storing some water in small ponds or tanks when flows are high for use in the spring or summer when the vineyards need it. Another important effort involves improving our ability to forecast weather conditions and river flows. By knowing frost and heat conditions further in advance, vineyards can coordinate their irrigation schedules ahead of frost events and heat waves so that less water is being pumped at any given time. In addition to water management steps, people in the watershed are undertaking salmon habitat restoration. Remember earlier we discussed the multiple stressors on salmon. Here, they're addressing other stressors as well as in-stream flow by removing barriers to fish migration, such as road culverts, and that's opened up more habitat for fish to use. Other habitat improvements include adding boulders and fallen trees to the river channel, which gives small fish good places to rest and hide, and also reclaiming old gravel pits next to the river as lakes for use by fish. Another example of a river system where in-stream flow has been an issue for salmon is the Shasta River. This is a major tributary to the Klamath River in far northern California. It's almost in Oregon. That's Mount Shasta in the picture there, and those glaciers you see are one source of the water for the Shasta River. It's very hot and dry in this watershed during the summer, and much of the land is farmed, primarily as alfalfa hay, like in this picture, which is used as livestock feed, or as pasture. Historically, this has been great coho salmon habitat because there was lots of very cold, clear water in the river year-round. Nowadays, however, the water does become warm because of the human use of that water, and juvenile coho can have a tough time surviving over the summer. One really neat habitat and water management project is occurring at Big Springs Ranch on the Shasta River. In 2009, the Nature Conservancy bought this ranch mainly because it contained a groundwater spring complex that provides excellent water for fish. The spring complex provides a constant year-round source of cold water to the river. The Nature Conservancy restored some of the area next to the stream, and very quickly they began to see better habitat conditions, and they think more young fish. So I want to summarize by saying that in-stream flow is a big issue in the western United States. This water is very valuable to the people who use it, and also very important to some fish species that people care very much about. I've given you a couple of examples where groundwater-surface water interactions have to be managed in order to provide for both human and ecological use.